Hello, my name is Chris Hartley, and I'm an associate editor at Policy and Society Journal and an assistant professor at the Department of Asian and Policy Studies at the Education University of Hong Kong. I'm speaking today with Dr. Jenny Lewis, who is a professor of public policy at the School of Social and Political Sciences at the University of Melbourne and the founding director of the Policy Lab at the same institution. Jenny recently co-edited a special issue for Policy and Society Journal addressing procedural policy tools, along with colleagues Azad Singh Bali, Michael Hallett, and M. Ramesh. Today, we will be briefly discussing topics addressed in this special issue. Thank you for your time today, Jenny, and I'll start with a general question. What is a procedural policy tool and why are they important?
Thanks very much, Chris. So I guess we've spent most of our time thinking about substantive policy tools rather than procedural, and we think about procedural tools as more the kind of policy techniques or mechanisms designed to affect how a policy is formulated and implemented. So it can be thought of as more a kind of soft tool rather than a hard tool. If you think of hard tools like regulation and legislation and taxes and so on, then procedural policy tools are more sort of organizational, more affecting the people who are actually getting the service in the instance of service delivery, and often used to alter aspects of a government's own workings, and obviously can then feed back into policy making behaviour and the kind of structures around governments. So they're kind of more indirect than substantive. They've received a lot less attention than substantive policy tools, but I guess we collectively sort of thought they're really important, and that was the kind of impetus for the special issue. They're important clearly because they can really shape relationships and change rules of the game in very significant ways. And it's also, I think, important to think about procedural tools as creating changes that feed back into policy and how government works, and focusing merely on the harder tools leads you to kind of overlook some of those other important things about the policy making process itself.
Excellent. Well, it's good to hear that the special issue is addressing a gap in the literature and that we're getting some insights into different types of tools. And that brings me to my second question. What are some of the uses of procedural policy tools covered in this special issue?
Yeah, there's a terrific collection of things and authors from around the world who really think about what procedural policy tools can be used for. Many of the papers really discuss that link between substantive and procedural tools and illustrate this in different ways via their kind of questions and their empirical examples, which range across a whole range of policy sectors. Others offer really new frameworks and conceptualizations of policy tools. Some explore their use at different levels of government, whether that's local government, state government, national and even transnational, and quite a few of them look across levels of government and look at the links at multi-levels. Some actually focus on policy tools and implementation, and quite a few of them talk about the effects of these procedural policy tools, which can help manage policy demands in some cases actually take control away from governments. In some of them help governments to learn, and in some instances increase innovation, for example, in public procurement, and even affect how services are structured and delivered. So it's a great collection and many different kind of topics dealt with.
That's great. That sounds like a very wide range of tool types and also of objectives and types of purposes as well for the tools. And that leads me to my final question, which pertains more to an article specifically that you've contributed within the special issue. And that is, what do we know about the effects of procedural policy tools, especially in regards to how frontline staff deliver publicly funded services?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So this was a paper that we contributed myself along with my colleagues Phuc Duin and Mark Considine. And it's about the sort of welfare to work reform that we've been tracking in Australia and the UK over more than 2 decades now. And we tried to think about the substantive tool here being central policy making and, in effect, the marketisation of welfare services, and the procedural tools as the kind of governance modes that are being used to actually deliver services by people working on the front line. We examine this really by looking at 4 ideal types, and we've really found over time that there's quite a tight coupling between the kind of central direction of policy and the desire to make those services, more, target driven and increasingly then more kind of bureaucratic as they were re-regulated, and what was actually happening in the minds of the frontline staff. So it might kind of seem obvious in one way that there is a link between those two things, but I guess having a data set and surveys over such a long time and seeing various iterations of reform in 2 countries allowed us to really demonstrate that there is quite a tight coupling between those 2 things, the central direction and what actually happens at the front line of services.
Right. This sounds like very important work, and of course it really lends some more nuance to, I think, our understandings of policy tools in general, and hope that this is the beginning of a longer conversations about different types of procedural policy tools. So Jenny, on behalf of Policy and Society Journal, I want to sincerely thank you for speaking with us today, and I wish you all the best in your future work.
Thanks very much, Chris. Pleasure.
Thank you.